Hey everyone, welcome to CoveredCall ETF Investing, your central hub for deep CoveredCall ETF data. Now here on this channel we specifically talk about high yield funds, how to invest in them sustainably and responsibly and for the long haul. That's what we normally talk about on this channel, but here we're going to be discussing something a little bit different. It's a little bit more personal to me, a little bit more revealing, but hopefully you find it interesting, you'll learn something new off of it. So which is back in early 2022, long before this channel even started, I actually filed for my US status, the green card. That doesn't make me a resident, it simply allows me to work and live in the US. Now, there's a few reasons for that. I've been married to my wife for almost 10 years now. She's a dual citizen. We have a lot of American family on both sides of our family that are American. So the opportunity to potentially get my green card has always kind of been there, and we decided this would probably be the right time to go for it. Even though we don't have any serious intentions on living in the US currently, I really like my job up here in Vancouver. We still got lots of family that live in Vancouver. So it has more to do with simply the flexibility if we decide in the next year or 2 or 3 years or anytime really in the future that we could potentially make that move. Now, understand there is a lot of tax implications that will arise out of this. And trust me, I'm fully diving into that currently, but I wanted to, at least in a video like this, try to answer maybe a couple of questions on that front that hopefully you all can learn something as well, which is what are the tax implications in maybe a few different states that I'm interested in living in. The cost of living, so we'll look at income tax level, sales taxes, health insurance, grocery costs, what else? Fuel costs, like filling up your gas tank. We're going to look at all that across these 4 states I'm interested in living in. We'll also compare it back to my home province of Vancouver. So hopefully you all learned something new, and it'll be certainly a little bit different on that front. A lot to get into, so let's hit it. Okay, here we go. We are looking at a map of roughly where I currently live, which is just in a suburb of Vancouver, really close to the border here. We also have family that kind of live just across the line in this area. So family close by on either side of the border, and also my wife likes to shop in Bellingham here. We also often fuel up in the States, despite there being a massive currency difference between Canada and the U.S., it's still cheaper to fill up in the U.S. So my wife often fills up in the States when she can. There's certain grocery products that she can get from Costco in Bellingham versus maybe a Costco up here. So certain things just better to buy in that case. Okay, so let's get into with that out of the way, let's get into 4 states I am interested in living in for all kinds of various different reasons. Now, I'm a big Pacific Northwest kind of guy. I like the big jagged mountains. I love trees and I love seasons. I was just talking to a family member recently about being on vacation in warm places like in the tropics, things like places like Mexico. And I'm like, after about 10 days, I'm kind of just done with the heat. I don't like heat. I like seasons. I like snow. And as weird as that might sound, I do like those things. Okay, so first state I'd be interested in moving to is actually Washington. Washington State. BC is also bordered with it. And more specifically, where would I want to live? Eastern Washington. And we're talking almost right on the 2 minutes away from the Idaho border in an area called Liberty Lake. This is, by all accounts, a very family-oriented area. Now, why specifically in the state or this region? Washington State actually has a 0 income tax, which is I didn't even realize that. Washington is more or less like on the political side of things, much more blue or Democrat leaning, which you sort of more associate with higher taxes, so income taxes and higher sales taxes. You kind of just, even without thinking about it, you would kind of just sort of expect that to be the case. But as it turns out, in my research here, it's a zero income percent state, so certainly that makes it appealing. Also, in this region, you get a much bigger city in Spokane, which is like between all the cities that are kind of in the interior Pacific Northwest is definitely the biggest. I think it has a metro size of, I think, closer to about 700,000 people. But anyway, no interest in living in like downtown Spokane. It would be probably a suburb. Now, is there any like work opportunities? Well, I build ships for a living, so no ships on the interior here. But I am a plumber by trade, so I can take that trade pretty much anywhere I go to. Now, ideally, if I move, I kind of want to be able to focus kind of more on the channel. I'd like to make more of a living off the channel if that was the case. But if I got to substitute the income, no problem. I can do the plumbing thing anywhere. So Liberty Lake, very family oriented. I really been watching a lot of videos on this area, and it's got a good vibe to it. Now, I wanted to stay close to the Idaho border, mainly because Idaho, even though it's not a 0% income tax state, it has a sales tax, it has an income tax, but Coeur d'Alene has also been another spot that I'm really interested in living in. It reminds me a lot of a vacation spot I take my family to every year, which is close by. It strikes me as very similar to Kelowna, BC. If you have never been to the Okanagan, you are missing out. This is such a beautiful city to visit, especially in the summertime. Lots of boating, lots of all kinds of water sports and things to do here in Kelowna. As far as Kelowna is concerned, if I was just to stay in Canada and if I took the US out of the equation and I wanted to live somewhere other than Vancouver, it would hands down be Kelowna. It's a home away from home, I find, in so many regards. So, and it's, even though it's still a bigger city, it's probably got about 150,000 people. Yeah, it's still, you can still easily get out of the city and sort of away from the noise, but it's downtown, kind of feels like a little mini Vancouver, which I do like. I don't like hanging out in Vancouver for traffic, but as far as just going downtown and experiencing downtown, it kind of has a bit of a little brother vibe to it. So Coeur d'Alene is much similar in that regard. So anyway, Coeur d'Alene, much more similar to Kelowna. There's also some really, as far as all-in taxes are concerned in Idaho, it ranks as one of the least expensive. So despite a sales tax and despite an income tax, just all-in taxes is one of the cheapest in the country. Now we're going to move farther east over to Montana, not much farther. We're going to stay on the same road here. Okay, so in Montana, this is probably the farthest east I'd go as far as this region is concerned, is probably Missoula, Montana. Now, for me, this actually has a bit of a current work connection. My work's parent company headquarters is here in Missoula, Montana. So I don't know, could I fandangle some sort of work opportunity through my current work and potentially live here and maybe work for the parent company? I don't know. But I am aware of that. Our parent company has a lot of different companies here in Montana, as our company owner is from Montana and he got to start in Missoula, Montana. So there is that connection there. Montana has very much the same sort of feel as Idaho and even even the valley region of Spokane, they all kind of have this very interesting vibe to it. Now, here in Missoula, the other interesting thing about this is that it's a 0% sales tax state. So no sales tax in Montana, which really brings this back to the question of living in a place like Eastern Washington where it's zero income taxes, being exposed to the much overall cheaper cost of living elements of Idaho, so that might include just shopping over here. And then maybe when it comes to buying bigger ticket items, whether it's a car or a trailer, maybe a cottage, but the idea is big ticket items, maybe making the drive over to Missoula, Montana to take advantage of the zero sales tax. It makes this a really interesting region to live in. Now, you could even argue, because I know that for people who are aware, they would say, well, Oregon is also a zero tax income state. That is true. If you're looking for another big ticket item, you could maybe go to Hermanston, smaller town. Missoula much bigger than sort of these inner border Oregon towns. So you'd probably drive maybe half an hour farther east than you would south to maybe say buy a car or buy that trailer or that other big ticket item that I was talking about there. But either way, this, I think, if you were to live here with exposure to the 0% sales taxes, cheaper cost of living in Idaho, I think really can make for it makes it a very interesting region to live in. I've been fascinated with this region for the better part of 12 years. I've wanted to take a road trip through here, just haven't yet. Anyway, let's look at some tax brackets in the US. Now, one thing that I didn't know, which you can't do in Canada, which is you can file jointly. So if we look at, let's look at the tax brackets on a single income. So this is a fascinating difference between Canada and the US. You see, in Canada, in this regard, much better, but on your first $15,000 of income that you earn, you don't actually you don't have to pay any taxes on. Now, you will pay upfront, but once you actually file it, you'll get money back for it. Now, if there's something that I'm missing here, then, for the American audience, you can chime in and say otherwise. But from what this bracket is showing me, it's saying, hey, the first you're paying taxes no matter what, no matter every dollar that you earn. What is interesting is on a federal level, you are paying 12% up to about $95,000. I want to say, no. Yeah. Okay, so that's. Oh, never mind. Okay, so from $44,000 to $95,000 is 22%. Where if you file jointly, which you can't do in Canada, so for me, like if I work, my wife doesn't work, we can actually get a much higher tax, much more breathing room. So we would have. Okay, here it is. I think here. Okay, so this is it. If you're filing jointly, you'd be paying 12% up to about $90,000 if you're filing jointly. In Canada, everybody still has to file their own income tax. They have to file their own income tax. And then there are certain credits that you can kind of swap over if one spouse doesn't work, and so on. So, for instance, in Canada, you can actually transfer, as far as I understand. Now, this is also built into like TurboTax software. But if one spouse or common law partner doesn't work, they can use their personal basic tax exemption, which is that first $15,000 that that you don't have to pay tax on. They can be transferred over to the spouse that is working. But there is no such thing as filing joint tax income brackets in Canada. That's not a thing. So this is a really nice. This is like at least on the federal level, that's a really nice, interesting bit of news to learn that you're basically for one income if you're married that your tax is now down to about 12% on $90,000. Okay, moving right along, income taxes. As I explained at the top of the video, Washington State is a 0% income tax rate, so don't let this 7% fool you. There's 3 asterisks down below, which simply means the state has a state capital gains income tax, but it's only on capital gains of over like $250,000. So I am far away from that, so not too worried about that. You can see here Idaho has an income tax rate of 5.8%. They also, I believe, it might be a flat tax state, so every income level is just simply paying the exact same. And then Montana has about 5.9. Now, if I remember correctly, there are certain exemptions that you can file for to reduce that ever so slightly. But I won't get into that. Just anyway, so that's what you can know about these 3 states. Now, I should also mention, before we move any farther, the other state that I'm also interested in living in is actually Tennessee. We got family that live in Tennessee. My wife's parents and her sister and that family live in Tennessee. It's certainly much more of a certainly less rain than this region. Definitely a lot hotter and muggier, I'm sure. You're going to be, your AC is going to be on all day long and all night probably. But this would be the other region I'd be interested in living in, which is also a 0% income tax state. Yeah. So anyway, moving right along, we're looking at sales taxes. As I said before, Oregon, which I have no interest in living in, has 0% sales tax. Montana, 0% sales tax. Washington State has the 4th highest sales tax in the region. So you can almost understand why living in a region like the Spokane Valley is much more appealing. I don't want to pay that if I can help it. And even Idaho has a much, it's one of the cheaper sales tax income states, and then being close to Oregon and Montana, you take your pick of the litter. Who knows? You could probably even drive to Costco here once every 2 months or once a month just to save up, do a big bulk run, and then come back. So yeah, I mean, anyway, so 4th most expensive sales tax, Idaho. 37th most expensive. 13th cheapest, let's just put it that way. And where does Tennessee rank in all this? Tennessee, number 2, despite that no income taxes. I mean, they got to get their money, right? It does cost a certain amount of money to run a state. They're going to get you one way or the other. So in Tennessee, number 2, Washington State, number 4. Anyway, so let's move along to the next section. So what we're looking at here, we'll compare what is your effective tax rate, which is basically your average tax rate across all brackets. I'm basing it off of basically a $90,000 income in Spokane, Washington, married, so filing jointly. So in Washington State, I'd be paying an effective tax rate of 15.47%. You can see here the effective tax rate is 7.82% on the federal level. And then you have this thing called FICA, which is essentially for Canadians, it's America's version of I guess it would be employment insurance. And here, you know what? Let's just open it up and see what it says. Instead of me giving you the definition, let's just read the definition. Federal insurance contributions. Tax Act is to fund Social Security, Medicare. We calculate the FICA taxes on one earner of the household. Okay, so Social Security and Medicare. There you go. That's what that is. So that's 7.65%. So all-in taxes for living in Washington State is 15.47%. You can see on the local level and the state level there is no income taxes. So 15.47% living in Washington State. Let's check out Idaho. 3% higher at 18.3%. You can see that on the state level, I'm paying 3.44%. But if we went back to our map, it's something like 5.8%. So for whatever reason, there is some sort of, a little bit of a tax break there. Maybe it has to do with some sort of income, but the state income taxes were reduced. Not sure why, but at any rate, effective tax rate 18.9. So Washington was 15.47 and Idaho 18.9. Moving along to Montana. Living in Missoula, Montana. Oh, for the last state, that was also living in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. Next up is Missoula, Montana. What do we got here? 19.9%, so that's 1% higher than Idaho, 4.5% higher roughly than Washington. And then we got Tennessee, which is basically, it's the same as Washington State at 15.47%. Now, it's pretty obvious, obviously, that just like looking at taxes alone isn't everything. I mean, when you incorporate family and whatnot into it and work opportunities, I mean, those can obviously speak volumes as to where you live versus simply choosing the state with the zero income taxes or the zero sales tax and all that. So I just wanted to make that be said because, and obviously opportunities, even where I'm currently living right now, even with potentially higher taxes, which we're going to be looking at right now. I decided to also just do a similar amount, $90,000, living in where I currently live, which is Vancouver, BC. How much am I actually paying? So my average tax rate here in Vancouver is 24.27%, a full 9% higher than Washington and Tennessee, a full 5% higher, 5 and a bit percent higher than living in Missoula, Montana. But let's also remember that if you live in Canada, you are paying into a socialized medical system, right? So going to the doctor, getting a surgery, I don't pay anything out of pocket for. I also have, right through my current work, I have a pension, I have benefits to get physio and go to a chiropractor and all this other kind of like great stuff. So yeah, you pay more, right? We do in Canada live in a capitalistic system, but it does support a quite large socialized, medical system. So anyway, you're certainly going to pay more for, employment insurance and income taxes, and you'll pay more for, of course, the taxes that go towards our medical system as well. So, but anyway, just wanted to compare the percentages. So 24.27%. Okay, moving along to what is it going to cost if I were to just include income, but also include capital gains as well. So I took that $90,000 that we said at the very beginning, and if I if I sold my property, converted my investments from CAD to USD, and then let's just say I had $300,000 and I'm living off of the monthly income. Now let's just say that monthly income generates about $30,000 here. So we're going to have $300,000 as our base investment, and then we'll have $30,000 of income from those investments. So living in Spokane, Washington, what do I pay as far as taxes on long-term capital gains if I were to hold certain investments for forever? $107. Now in America, they don't have anything like the TFSA here in Canada, right? The most similar thing is probably the Roth IRA, but it's also age dependent. Like it becomes tax free at a certain age, whereas the TFSA here in Canada, you can just extract whenever, and that account is tax free. Nice, awesome benefit for Canadians. So Washington State paying only $107. Let's move on to Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. much higher. Whereas before I was paying, oh yeah, okay, so these guys have, I guess, a state capital gains income tax. I'm not too sure. I didn't actually look at what states effectively have that, but it didn't show up in our income tax map here, whereas Washington State does, right? It says 3 state only taxes capital gains income. Okay, it has a 1 star. Okay, so state has a flat income tax, so that's what the 1 star here is for. Okay, so whatever, not really sure what's going on there with state tax rates. Oh, you know what it must be? Okay, so this is just, you know what this is including? This must just be including state income, 5.8. Yeah, that's what it has to be including. 5.8. There we go, 5.8. So it's not a capital gains tax in that state. It's just the income taxes, which we already looked at. So as far as if we just take the state out of the equation, then it's just $107. There is no other amount, which now that I see that, I actually, when I pulled all this up, I didn't realize that this was essentially just the income tax. So it's pretty much going to be just the same across the board. So that would be the income taxes. But yet on the calculator over here, it calculated marginal tax rate 3.44%. So I guess when you combine all these other tax brackets, the state tax is lowered somehow. Anyway, obviously, clearly, there's so much more to be said about all that. But anyway, what am I paying on investment income here in Idaho? It would be, once again, $107. Montana, it's going to be the same, $107. State income tax there at the full income tax rate is 14.27, where Idaho, the full income tax rate is 17.40. So yeah, moving along to Tennessee, 0% income tax, and you're paying $107 for long-term capital gains in that state. And then in Canada, if you were to have a similar number of employment income at $90,000, we're going to have to do this a little bit differently. Let's just take this away. We're taking away capital gains, and we're currently paying a total tax rate of $21,847. Let's add in $30,000. And what do we get? It's like $4,500, and the average income tax rate goes from, I wonder what it was at. Okay, so with $30,000 capital gains at 21.92% for the average tax rate, and then it goes back up to 24.27. So you actually lower your average income tax but with $30,000 of capital gains. Now, investing in Canada for myself, again, with a TFSA, and with once I eventually get into a non-registered account, right, a taxable account, and investing in high-yield funds, capital gains is going to make up a small portion of the types of high-yielding ETFs I invest in. But to stay kind of common throughout all of our examples, I thought it'd be interesting just to show that. So essentially, you're paying, like almost $4,000 more on top of your current income. Okay, so let's actually now compare a bunch of other stuff, which is cost of living when it comes to fuel. Washington State has one of the highest average gas prices in the country. Idaho is not too far behind, and Montana, right? So they're all kind of in the bottom there. I want to say Tennessee is kind of right near the top. So average tax rate or average fuel between all these states, we got Tennessee, the king when it comes to cheaper gas rates, and the other in Washington being, Tennessee's in the penthouse and Washington's in the outhouse as far as those cost comparisons are. But let's convert that to Canadian dollars just to see how much it would actually be. So if, let's go $4.17, Let's go, $4.17. What's that? So that is, despite it being one of the most expensive places in the country to buy gas, even with the conversion rate, it is still way cheaper than Vancouver. Like here in Vancouver, we love to throw taxes on taxes on taxes. There's probably about 7 different, now it's a bit of an exaggeration, but it's like 8 taxes on our fuel. It's probably more like 4 or 5. it's still so much, $1.50. Here in Vancouver, we're probably, I think average in my area right now is probably closer to about $1.80 currently. So it's creeping up. What would get you to $1.80? Let's $1.50 maybe. Nope, not good enough. Let's try $4.75. Okay, well, we're getting a little bit closer. So the average gas price in Vancouver, BC is almost $5 a gallon in the US. Okay, anyway, so by comparison, in Washington, it's about $1.50 on average. But going to Tennessee, you would be paying, let's see, $2.95. So let's compare that. $2.95. $1.06. It's, oh man, that's incredible. $1.06. So a good, almost a full 70 cents lower. Well, probably it's about 70 cents lower than where I currently live, and it's a good 44 cents on average cheaper in a per liter basis than Washington State. Okay, so we'll move along to the average grocery prices. Now, this is where I was going to say, like, Idaho actually has one of the least expensive places to buy your groceries. So we have, this is on a per person basis per month. You got, in Idaho, it's about $2.81. So living close to Idaho, I think you get sort of more general, broad, cheaper expenses. Again, regardless of paying a sales tax and all the rest of this. Buying groceries, something you're going to have to buy no matter what, no matter where you live. Whereas sort of those other states, where do they kind of compare? So Montana at $3.23 on average versus Idaho's $2.81. Let's see, where's Tennessee ranking? $3.46, and Washington somewhere, I'm sure, near the top, $4.02. Okay, so quite the difference, especially if you were to, say, live in, say, Eastern Washington, at least having that accessibility to shop in Idaho. In the panhandle of Idaho is quite convenient on that way. There is a bit of a, I guess you could call it a heat map of what's cheaper. You can see the lighter you go, the cheaper it is, the darker it is, the more expensive it is here. So you have Idaho here. So cheapest, right? Cheapest, more expensive, most expensive, and then where's Tennessee? It's kind of, I guess somewhere in the middle. Moving along to average utility bills, we got Tennessee at $4.71. It's not the cheapest. Montana is king on this one, $4.62. Idaho $4.82, and then on the average monthly utility bill, Washington is $5.01. In this case, these are marginal differences in my opinion. Like, even if you are paying, say, $30 more than here, that's not a make or break. It's nowhere near. It's probably the least consequential factor in living in any one of these states is the average utility bill, right? So, I mean, maybe unless you're, Alaska, I'm sure in certain places in Alaska it can get even more expensive than that. Average health insurance. We got, let's see, where do these all rank as far as for a family of 4? So Tennessee ranks 14th for average health insurance as far as most expensive. Let's see, where does Montana rank? 35th most expensive. Idaho ranks 37th. And I was actually surprised by this. Washington State ranks 49th. Again, something you wouldn't maybe expect from right, when you think of places like Seattle, you think of higher costs of living, especially in the downtown. But I don't know. I guess overall, it's one of the cheapest places for average health insurance. Basically, at this point, it pretty well wraps up sort of how I'm looking at, looking at taxes and looking at what's the most expensive, what region, why I'm interested in this region. There's obviously a lot that goes into it. Again, to recap, Missoula more for the potential work connections. Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. It really reminds me of a place here currently in Canada that I wouldn't mind living in. Kelowna. It's almost like the sister city in my opinion. Spokane Valley, you get exposure to a bigger city, so there's obviously going to be more to do, but it's a 0% income tax state. Also Missoula, 0% sales tax state, which makes this region a fascinating region. If you don't mind, I'm sure, the frigid winters living inland. There'll be a lot less rain, especially if you're from Vancouver. Vancouver, you get dumped on cloudy weather all the time. There's a lot of people who come from other parts of the country aren't used to how much cloudy weather you actually get in Vancouver. But so in this region, a little bit sunnier. I was gonna factor in a weather comparison, but we're well over time here. So at any rate, hopefully you enjoyed this little walkthrough of where I'd consider living, and there's obviously going to be more to come on this front. So much more to look into, especially when it comes to exactly how I would invest if I were to live in the States, because again, everything becomes upended. Investment brokerages would change, but as far as it currently stands, I've lived in Vancouver my whole life. I have a really amazing career here in Vancouver that is not going to be given up so easily. I still have family here, this is still an amazing place to live despite its cost of living. Vancouver is home, and I really want to make it as such. No matter what I do with my finances and investments, I really want this to work for my family. I've been talking about on the channel for forever that I'm going to beat the Vancouver housing market and provide an actual house for my wife and kids, something that for us millennial Gen Z generations is it feels very much like a very distant, unattainable goal, but we can get into a house in different ways. I've talked a lot about renting. In all these other regions I talked about, I'd rent a house. I wouldn't live in one. I'd full on rent, but I want to do that in Vancouver, and really try to show that we can make home ownership work in a different way, whether that be through owning equities to support living in, say, a house through a rental. So I digress. That's no doubt for another talk. So much more to come. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. I know it's long-winded, but hopefully you learned something new. So with that being said, hit all the buttons of the like and subscribe variety, and I'll see you all in the next video.